Alright, hello there, thrill seekers. That was a little bit of the song Rumble by Link Wray, and I played it with the official Taylor Swift guitar pick, which is given to me by a friend of mine who got it when he bought a special edition Taylor Swift CD for his wife. My friend said it will change my life because if I mention Taylor Swift in my video, I'll get like thousands and thousands of views just because I've mentioned Taylor Swift, and the algorithm will hear Taylor Swift, and so we'll see what happens. And that was Rumble played the right way, because when I was at that audition for that surf band the other day, one of the guys in the band showed me the correct way to play Rumble, and showed me that I had been playing it wrong all these years. And yeah, if you listen to the original version, yeah, the way most people play it is completely wrong. So let's talk about something else that's wrong. The Four Noble Truths are wrong. Let's get into that. But first, I wanted you to see the flowers. That's the main attraction. Ziggy is somewhere back there. You can't see him, but he's somewhere. Well, maybe you can see a little bit of him. Yeah, you can see a little bit of him. Right? See that little bit of Ziggy over there? Right there. Hi, Ziggy. Every spring, this garden blooms with flowers that we did not plant. They must have been planted by a previous owner, and they come up every spring. It's always lovely. So, the reason I'm making a video today is because I made a video, was it yesterday? Yeah, or someday. Someday in the past I made a video. And in that video, I made a passing comment about how my teacher, Nishijima Roshi, I think I specifically said he didn't like the version of the Four Noble Truths that said the cause of suffering is desire. And I got at least 3 comments. I haven't checked today. There might be more from people who are distressed by this. And it's funny to me that people are distressed by this. I know that not everybody watches all of my videos, nor would I expect everybody to watch all of my videos because there's way too many. But I've addressed this, I don't know how many times in the past, but maybe I haven't addressed it in a while. So this is why newcomers are missing this. The Nishijima Roshi had an interesting take on the Four Noble Truths, and if you want to read it for yourself, it's very easy to find. This book is available on it's available on Amazon for sure. I don't know if it's available on Barnes & Noble's website. It's probably available other places. It's called 3 Philosophies and 1 Reality and NHK Radio Talks by Gudo Wafu Nishijima. Now, if you don't want to, it's pretty cheap. I can't remember what the price of this was. But if you don't want to spend any money at all, you can also find the same, well, you can't find the NHK Radio Talks, but you can find 3 Philosophies, 1 Reality on a website called shobogenzo.net. And you have to go to that page and go to, hold on, let me look. You go to that page, shobogenzo.net, you find a drop-down menu called Texts. You go into that drop-down menu and look for booklets. And when you click on booklets, you will see a booklet called 3 Philosophies, 1 Reality. That's the one you want. I'll leave a link if I can, but in case the link doesn't work, that's where you find it for free. So, I'm going to give you my version of Nishijima Roshi's version, but before you decide to leave scathing comments, I would ask you to at least read his version of it, because, you know, he tells it better than I do. So I'm going to read the specific bits that are relevant to this idea of the Four Noble Truths. So it happens right here on page 1 of the book. We see the Four Noble Truths. And what does Nishijima Roshi have to say about the Four Noble Truths? Buddhist scriptures tell us that after Gautama Buddha attained the truth, he wanted to teach others what he had learned. But he also had some doubt as to whether people would be able to understand his theory because of its complexity. Tradition says that a god from heaven gave him great encouragement to give his first sermon, and so he went ahead. His first sermon was preached to his 5 former companions with whom he had studied asceticism. We are told that in his first sermon he preached the Four Noble Truths, or in my translation, the theory of the 4 views. This is where we get into the bits that he differs from tradition. And the middle way. This is why we think of these two teachings as central theories of Buddhism. To understand these theories is to understand the core of the Buddhist philosophical system. Unfortunately, many people studying Buddhism in the present age have not had the chance to do so yet, especially in Western countries. And then he goes on to talk about the traditional interpretation. There's the traditional interpretation for you, for those of you watching on video. And he says, traditionally, Katvari Arya Satyani, or the Four Noble Truths, are Dukkha Satya, the truth of suffering; Samudaya Satya, the truth of aggregates, or the origin of suffering; Nirodha Satya, the truth of cessation or denial, and this in parentheses says the destruction of suffering; and Marga Satya, the truth of the right way. When I was a teenager, I read about the Four Noble Truths in Buddhist books, but I could not understand what they were referring to at all. So these Four Noble Truths, which were said to be the core of Buddhism itself, became a hindrance or stumbling block in my efforts to study Buddhism. If we look in old scriptures, the Theravada Buddhist scriptures, for example, we can find traditional explanations of the meaning of these Four Noble Truths. They explain that the truth of suffering means that all things and events in this world are suffering, that the truth of aggregates means that all suffering derives from human desire, that the truth of cessation or denial means that we must destroy our desire, and the truth of the right way means that having destroyed our desire, we can find the right way. Then Nishijima Roshi goes on to say, but I can find no real meaning in these explanations, no matter how hard I try. If all things and events in this world are suffering, then Buddhism can be at best a dogmatic and pessimistic religion. If all suffering results from human desire, then Buddhism can be no more than asceticism. If the idea of destroying all our desires was a Buddhist idea, then Buddhism must be a religion which advocates what is impossible. For it is utterly impossible for us to destroy our desires. Desire is the basis of our human existence itself. The truth of the right way is further explained as the Eightfold Noble Path: right view, right thinking, right speech, right behavior, right livelihood, right effort, right state of body, and right state of mind. But I cannot find any relationship between this fourth truth and the first three, so that was his problem. And here's how he solved the problem. He talks about when he was 18, he discovered the book Shobo Genzo by Dogen, and he was fascinated by this book because it seemed to be saying something important, and it was written in his own language, Japanese, but he could not understand a word of it. But after a while, he found this. Master Dogen expresses his ideas in Shobo Genzo based on a pattern of 4 phases. First, he explains a problem from the idealistic point of view, that is, as an idea using abstract concepts. Then immediately after this first phase, he explains the same problem, but this time from the objective or material point of view. In other words, he gives concrete examples and facts. Then in the next phase, he explains the problem yet a third time as a real problem, that is, realistically thinking. Of course, it is very difficult for him to explain the reality surrounding the problem with words in a book, but he attempts to do so by bringing together the subjective viewpoint which he presents first and the second objective viewpoint. He synthesizes the two viewpoints into a realistic appraisal of the problem, a synthesis of the self and the external world. In the final phase, he tries to suggest the subtle, ineffable nature of reality itself by using symbolic, poetic, or figurative forms of speech. Now, you don't find this in every sentence of Shobo Genzo, but in a lot of it you can find it, particularly in Genjo Koan, and I don't have the whole Genjo Koan memorized in the top of my head, but I've done videos on that, so let's just pass that by and keep going. Now, he goes on for a few paragraphs, which if you really want to understand what he's trying to say, you should go read those paragraphs yourself, but this is a video, not a book, so I'm going to skip those. He says, after a few paragraphs, "Then I remembered the Four Noble Truths which had defeated me so completely. I could not help seeing a link between the four-phased pattern in Master Dogen's works and the Four Noble Truths. Then I started to think that possibly the biggest contradiction which Gautama Buddha must have faced in his thinking would have been between the subjective idealistic thought of traditional Indian religion, Hinduism, and the objective materialistic philosophies of the 6 great philosophers who were popular in India at the time. I'm not sure exactly who those guys were, but apparently around the time of Gautama Buddha's life, there was 6 great philosophers who pushed what is kind of regarded as a proto-materialistic, proto-scientific kind of philosophy. I thought that Gautama Buddha's solution to this contradiction was his discovery that we are in fact living in reality, not, as idealists tend to think, in the world of ideas, or as materialists tend to think, in a world of objective matter alone. Gautama Buddha established his own philosophy based on the fact that we live in the world of momentary existence, in the real world itself. But to express this real world in words is impossible. And so, skipping on a little bit, he said he needed some method with which people could see directly what the nature of reality is. This method is Zazen, a practice which was already traditional in India from ancient times, although it wasn't called Zazen, it was called Dhyana. Gautama Buddha found that when we sit in this traditional posture of quietness, we can see directly what reality is. And as far as the Four Noble Truths go, let's see, it goes like this. I thought that Dukkha Satya, or the truth of suffering, was the ancient Indian way of expressing idealistic philosophy. When we are full of ideals and anxious to realize those ideals, we invariably suffer from being unable to realize them. I thought that Samudaya Satya, or the truth of aggregates, might in fact refer to aggregates of paramanu, the Sanskrit word for the smallest particle of matter in existence, the modern atom. And of course, the atom has been supplanted by other material particles, but it's still basically the same idea, that the material world is composed of tiny particles. And the Indians had this idea too way back in the day. The truth of aggregates would thus refer to a primitive science of matter, to the philosophy of materialism as it existed at that time. Then I interpreted Nirodha Satya, or the truth of cessation or denial, to mean a dialectic synthesis, a negation of idealism and materialism. In the ultimate stage, philosophies can never be reality itself. Gautama Buddha found this fact, so Marga Satya, the truth of the right way, is his recommendation to practice Zazen. So that's it in its most basic form, and I'm going to say it again because I'm going to get comments where people aren't going to pay attention to what I'm saying, but go read the book yourself if you really want to understand it. Now, as to my reaction to this when I heard it, I had been studying Buddhism for about 10 years before I ever met Nishijima Roshi, and I'd been practicing Zazen for about 10 years, maybe 11 or 12 years before I met Nishijima Roshi. And so my first teacher had talked about the Four Noble Truths, but the only time I can really remember him doing anything in depth about the Four Noble Truths was when I first encountered him and I took a class called Zen Buddhism at Kent State University, and because he was doing a university class, he wanted to present the whole picture of Buddhism. So he started off by talking about early Buddhism, and he talked about the Four Noble Truths, and he gave them in the standard version that Nishijima Roshi here criticizes. And then we kind of just moved on. I don't remember my first Zen teacher really doing any lectures or talking much about the Four Noble Truths or about suffering, in his regular talks when we would do Zazen and then have a talk after. It was just not something that came up very often. It wasn't something we studied in any great depth. Ziggy, hold on. Let me finish this. So, fast forward 10 years later, and I'm in Japan, and I hear Nishijima Roshi talking about the Four Noble Truths in his interpretation, and I wasn't flustered by this, because I'm not a person who came to Buddhism because, I want to be a Buddhist, and I read this book about Buddhism and the Four Noble Truths, and here I am, ready to be a Buddhist. Oh my God, you're saying it's different from what I read? So I wasn't really worried about that. In fact, I liked his interpretation of the Four Noble Truths because I had kind of the same problem with it. The idea of cutting off desire was especially difficult because how do you cut off desire? You can do something... like stopping comparing your life to what you think it ought to be. So in that sense, that's kind of the way my brain interpreted the whole cutting off of desire thing. It's not that you're trying to make desires not arise ever, but you're trying not to be quite as swayed between worrying about the difference between what your life is actually like and what you think it ought to be like. I think maybe it'd be nicer to be out here if it was a little warmer and there weren't so many people doing yard work in the back. I don't know how much of that came across on the recording, but there was a guy running a weed eater or something a few minutes ago, and then there was a helicopter. So I might, fuss about, oh my God, the life should be different, and if I can stop doing that, okay, maybe I suffer a bit less. But still, the idea of suppressing or cutting off all desire didn't make much sense to me, and I did like his interpretation. Now, I think when I hear these comments from these... There's another noise from the sky. Maybe it's one of Elon Musk's rockets. But, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, when I get these comments from people on the comment section, I sometimes feel like I'm talking to these people who are like the biblical literalists I used to talk to when I was a teenager and I was trying to be Christian. So they would say things like, the Bible is the literal word of God and it is without error. It is inerrant. There is no mistakes in the Bible. And then I would say, well, yeah, but the Bible that you read is in English. And the Bible wasn't originally written in English. It was written in Greek and Hebrew, I suppose, but definitely not English, which probably didn't... I don't think English even existed at the time the Bible was written. So how can you say that's the literal word of God? Oh, they had an answer for that. The hand of God guided the translators who translated it into English. But only certain versions, because certain other versions are not guided by the hand of God, and you shouldn't read them, but you should read the versions that are guided by the hand of God, and those are the literal inerrant words of God. So I never heard anybody say this, but I kind of feel that some of these people I'm talking to online are applying that same kind of logic to Buddhist scriptures. But when I look at the Buddhist scriptures, to me, I think of it as being like a 2,500-year-old telephone game. And I don't know if you don't, maybe kids don't play the telephone game anymore, maybe people from other countries don't know what it is, but it's when you get a bunch of kids together, it's like an elementary school game or a game you play at a campsite or something, whatever, when a bunch of kids are together. And one kid whispers a sentence to the next kid and they form a line and they get to the end of it, and by the end of it, the sentence that the first kid whispered has changed into something completely different by the time it gets to the last kid. So I feel like, yeah, relying on ancient scripture is a bit like that. If you don't believe in the whole inerrant word thing, that the hand of God guides the translators and stuff, well, what you're getting is a translation of a translation of a translation. You don't even know if the people who wrote the book in the first place, in the original book, really understood what the Buddha was saying. I mean, you can't be sure of that. So things change, and the thing is, everybody's got their own interpretation. I just told you a couple of minutes ago my interpretation of how I dealt with this idea of the end of suffering. Everybody's got their own interpretation, no matter how much they insist that their interpretation is exactly as it's written. You've got to interpret it somehow. So I appreciated Nishijima Roshi's interpretation of the Four Noble Truths, and I've just found them more useful than the standard one. I also think that Nishijima Roshi's way of understanding the Four Noble Truths doesn't negate the traditional interpretation. It's just another way of understanding the traditional formula that we've all heard a million times. So I don't feel like it's as radical as some people might think it is, but some people might think it's radical. And if you don't like it, well, there's plenty of Buddhist teachers out there who interpret it the standard way, and you can go listen to them, and that's fine with me. I don't really care that much. It's just, I feel like since people seem to wonder what I was going on about in that last video, I should try to explain. So there you go. It's in this book, as I say, the Three Philosophies in One Reality, or it's available as a free download as a PDF file on shobogenzo.net. So go look at it yourself. So that's it. I don't say the Four Noble Truths are wrong, but maybe they're a little wrong. Okay, if you want to contribute to me saying the Four Noble Truths are wrong some more, which I probably won't do it for a while anyway, you can go to the URL that you're about to see on the screen below, or that you're about to hear if you're listening to the audio version, and that is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate, and that's where I get most of my money from, is from your contributions. And yeah, I don't get any money from sales of this book, by the way. I have no connection with Nishiji Moroshi's estate or any of that, so that's not why I'm advertising the book. Yeah, anyway, so that's it. We'll see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, what do you think of the Taylor Swift guitar pick? Do you think the Taylor Swift guitar pick made my playing sound better? Oh gosh. There's that guy with the weed eater. Let's go inside to escape the weed eater, okay? Yeah, I can see you want to go in. You don't like that weed eater.